I grew up in a mountain village right on the prefectural border, a place where mountains closed in from every angle, hemming us in, swallowing the horizon. For us kids, the mountains weren't just backdrop scenery. They were everything. A playground, a secret world, sometimes even a place to hide. One evening when I was in elementary school, I got in trouble at home. I'd done something bad. I can't even remember what it is now though. But my parents had had enough. My father shoved me outside and locked the front door. I sat there on the porch pounding the door, crying until my voice was hoarse. I begged them to forgive me. Promised I wouldn't do it again. But the lock never turned. No footsteps came. At some point, I just gave up. The sun was slipping behind the ridgeline. It was getting dark. The air was cooling with that damp smell you only get in the mountains. Feeling small and ashamed, I wandered off into the woods. There was this massive tree up the slope, not far from the edge of the village, and at its base, the roots twisted in such a way that they left a hollow, just wide enough for a child to crawl in and curl up. That hollow had always been my secret place, my little fort, when I wanted to escape the world. That night, it became my bed. I climbed inside, pulled my knees tight, and listened as the sounds of the mountains transitioned. Daytime cicadas gave way to the rasp of crickets. Something scuttled through the undergrowth, maybe a beetle or a mouse. The air was thick with the smell of earth, pine needles, and something faintly sweet that I couldn't quite place. I was exhausted and sleep took me quite quickly. When I opened my eyes, the forest floor was covered by the morning light. My back ached from the hard earth, and for a moment I forgot where I was. And then I noticed them, right at the mouth of the hollow, placed carefully, as if waiting for me, were 3 chestnuts, still in their spiny husks, damp with dew. I knew I hadn't put them there, and the woods around me were silent. I was starving though, so I cracked one with my teeth and hands and I ate. They were sweet, softer and richer than any chestnut I'd had before. And when I stumbled home, I thought my parents were going to be relieved, but instead they shouted at me all over again. They'd spent the whole night searching with the neighbors. Lanterns and flashlights had combed the woods until dawn. I tried to explain that I was in the tree roots the whole time, I never moved. But they only shook their heads and told me off for lying, because they swore they'd checked the hollow more than once, and I hadn't been there. Even now I don't really understand. I remember crawling into that hollow, waking up with the chestnuts waiting at the entrance. So why did the searchers swear that the tree was empty? And who or what left those chestnuts for me? Sometimes I wonder if it was just a kindness. In Japanese folklore, chestnuts have long been seen as the food of the mountain, tied to autumn festivals, offerings left at shrines, even sustenance for spirits. Hunters used to leave them at certain stones, calling them gifts for the kami. So maybe the chestnuts were meant as protection, a way of saying, you're safe here tonight. But another thought lingers, one that I can't quite shake either. What if they weren't a gift, but a claim? Something in the mountains took me out of sight, hid me away from the eyes of my own family, and when it was done, it marked me with food to eat that wasn't mine. I'll never know. But sometimes when I walk alone in the mountains, or I smell chestnuts roasting at autumn festivals, it kind of makes my stomach turn. This happened back when I was in high school. Our club had a training camp in Nagano, but instead of staying at a ryokan or some inn, the plan was unusual. We were going to go clean up an abandoned kindergarten and sleep there. It hadn't been maintained at all, so before we could settle in, the whole group spent hours sweeping and clearing dust. The yard and the classrooms, or what was left of them, were exactly what you might expect, infested with insects, cobwebs galore, long-legged centipedes under mats, moths beating against dirty windows. But the staff room, or at least the room that looked like one, was different. It was locked. A heavy old padlock sealed the door. At first no one thought much of it. But if we left that room untouched, there wouldn't be enough sleeping space for the teachers and alumni who were staying with us. So, in the end, someone decided, we're gonna have to break the lock. The padlock finally gave way, and the door creaked open, and we stood there staring. The ceiling, every inch of it was covered in paper, talisman, and not ordinary ofuda either. Each one was inked with these strange images. They looked like spiders, or maybe spider-shaped humans. Thin arms, too many legs, warped faces. Hi, Jay here. This is already unsettling. In Japanese folklore, talismans, ofuda, are used to trap or ward off or seal away something. If you see hundreds of them crammed together in one place, it usually means something dangerous is being kept in, not just purified. Back to the story. But at the time I didn't care. We were all in that sweaty, overconfident sports team mindset. So I laughed it off and said, what's the big deal? And I took a broom and I knocked them all down, one by one. These brittle pieces of paper fluttered to the dusty floor. All of them except one. The last talisman clung stubbornly in the far corner. I dragged a stepladder over to it, climbed up, and tore it off with my bare hands. And that's when the ceiling panel gave way. A black flood of spiders poured down. They hit my arms, my face. They scattered across the floor in all directions. I heard people shouting, screaming, scrambling out of the room. But even then I didn't stop. I vacuumed them up. Every last one of them. Their legs thrashing against the nozzle. And then I blasted the crawl space above with a whole can of bug spray. Until the air was sharp with chemicals. Finally I nailed the ceiling board back into place. Like nothing had happened. Looking back now, I don't know how I had the nerve to do that. We ended up all getting off to sleep in the abandoned kindergarten without any issue. I personally had a great night's sleep. Nothing weird happened. But the next morning when I went outside to put my shoes back on, I got a surprise. Everybody else's shoes were fine, but mine were wrapped with this spider silk, like almost a cocoon. White threads were binding the leather. It looked like morning dew, glistening. That was only the beginning. Later, during a test of courage, I wandered off the trail, a straight road, one I knew shouldn't have been confusing, and somehow I ended up lost in what looked like a deserted mountain village. That same night, my girlfriend, who had gone into the dark on her own, came back pale, shaking, saying that she swore she saw someone in white clothes and they had chased her, stumbling and muttering inhumanly fast through the trees. It felt like the mountain itself was trying to tear us apart. The only reason I think I survived was because of my great-grandfather's charm. He'd been a Buddhist priest, and he'd given me a small wooden talisman, carved with his own seal. I always kept it in my wallet, tucked behind my bills. When I checked it after everything, after the spiders, the wandering, the chase, the charm was charred black, as if it had been burned by some invisible fire. Even now I believe that's what saved me, so you don't need to tell me twice. Things sealed away with ofuda, especially with drawings like those, are never meant to be touched. Better to leave them buried, forgotten, locked away. Because in the mountain there are creatures and curses that I don't think we'll ever understand. And if you disturb them, you might not get another warning. Hi, Jay here. Talismans like that aren't just for decoration. They're meant to keep something sealed in, I believe anyway. And those drawings of spider humanoids, that kind of reminds me of a yokai named Joro Gumo, a spider that disguises itself as a woman to lure people into its den. Another possibility is Tsuchigumo, the earth spiders, said to live in Japan's mountains hunting travelers. Either way, the spiders in this story weren't your standard arachnids, I think. This happened when I was hiking alone in the mountains of Chichibu. I'd done solo hikes before, but this one left me with a memory that I can't shake. one that will forever keep me up at night if I let my thoughts wander off too far. It all started with footsteps. At first I thought nothing of it. Trails echo weirdly in the mountains, so when I heard the sound of crunching leaves behind me, I just figured it was another hiker. But every time I stopped, the steps stopped too. The pattern was too precise. There was no lag, no delay. My boots scuffed, then silence. I sipped from my canteen, and the forest went dead behind me. I forced myself to glance back. Nothing. Just a twisting path framed by trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. It was really disturbing to me, because I was a single woman out on a solo hike. It wasn't until late afternoon that I finally saw him. A man. Standing maybe 30 meters back, close enough to see the outline of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, but not his face. He didn't move, he didn't wave. Didn't even pretend to check his gear like most hikers do when they pass each other. He just stood there, body slightly angled, as if watching me decide what to do next. I walked faster, and after a while, when I glanced back again, the trail was empty. By the time I reached the small mountain hut on the ridge, the sun had already dipped behind the slope, and the hut was nothing more than an unmanned shelter. Wood rotting in the corners, the faint smell of mildew, but that hut was all the shelter that was available on that trail. I felt like I had no other options. I slipped inside. I shut the warped door and I dropped my pack against it. For a while I sat in the half-dark, listening to the trees creak in the wind, until I turned on my flashlight, because I didn't like how quickly it was getting dark. Then came the sound. Scratching. Faint at first, then deliberate. A slow drag along the wood. Not the scamper of an animal, not the wind. I was sure it was fingernails, testing the walls. I turned towards the window, flashlight trembling in my hand. There he was. Face pressed against the glass. Not staring in, but smiling. Lips stretched tight, teeth visible. His breath fogged the pain, and his hands pawed lightly at the frame like he was trying to decide whether to come in or not. When my flashlight hit him, he didn't startle. He didn't seem embarrassed. He didn't run. He leaned closer, his head tilted slightly, like he was curious. Then with a jerk, he ducked down and he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the far wall, clutching a small knife from my pack, staring at the door until the sky turned grey again. When I finally stepped out at dawn, knife in hand, the forest was silent and the trail was empty. But in the dirt by the hut's wall, there were prints. Boots. They circled the hut over and over, looping, pausing, doubling back, at one spot directly beneath the window. The prints were pressed so deep into the earth, it was like he stood there for hours. I never saw him again, and I thank God for that, but I can't stop replaying it in my head. He could have walked into that hut. He could have done anything. That door wouldn't have held him off. Instead, he stood outside all night, smiling at me through the glass, just to let me know he was there. This summer, I had the single most terrifying experience of my life. At first, I couldn't even think about telling anyone. But now that some time has passed, I've calmed down enough to put it into words. I grew up deep in the mountains of the Chugoku region. It's rural, proper countryside. I'm part of a small local nature club. We organize events, things like hiking tours, cleanup projects, and seasonal camping trips. Not far from my house, about a 25-minute drive, there's a mountain. That mountain was the heart of most of our activities. We knew its trails and ridges like the backs of our hands. Recently our group decided to hold an event for the public, a guided hike to showcase the beauty of the mountain and its forests. The idea was to get more local people interested in the nature on their doorstep. I agreed to help with the preparations. My task was to get equipment ready and choose the best route. I climbed that mountain countless times, but I figured I should go again, alone, just to walk the trail and think through what would work best for guiding a large group. The day I went, the weather was perfect. Clear skies, crisp air, a beautiful day to be in the mountains. I had my camera with me, snapping pictures along the way, thinking they'd be good for pamphlets. Honestly, I was really just enjoying myself out there. But by the time I reached about halfway to my target point, the trail led me to a rest area near a natural spring. I stopped for a drink, sitting there with the sound of dripping water and cicadas echoing in the trees. And that's when I noticed the light beginning to change, the sky dimming, as if clouds were rolling in. I thought, well, maybe I should head back now. But the plan for the event was to guide people even higher than this. I needed to push on a little more, just to check things properly. If the weather turned, I could turn back. I stood up, adjusted my bag, and then I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, a faint sound like a voice. I froze, listening, looked around. The trail was empty. No one ahead, no one behind, but the sound had been clear, like someone calling. I told myself it must have been the rustling of the leaves, nothing more. I shook it off and kept walking. And then it came again. This time it was clearer, weak, thin, almost fragile, neither obviously male nor female. I stopped, straining my ears. The sound hadn't come from the trail. It had come from the brush off to the side, where the trees thickened and the thorny undergrowth hid the ground. My first thought was, an injured hiker. I cut my hands and shouted, "Hey! Is somebody there?" The mountain swallowed my voice. No reply. For a moment I hesitated. It would be stupid to ignore it though. What if somebody had really hurt themselves? Maybe they fell from somewhere high. I pushed through the brush, calling out as I went. Thorns snagged at my clothes. Bugs stirred in the leaves. The undergrowth was high enough that a small person could disappear in it entirely. I swept my hands through the branches, scanning the ground, stepping carefully. Then suddenly the undergrowth ended. I stepped into a small clearing I'd never seen before. The air was different there. Still, damp, kind of heavy. The trees no longer crowded, so close together. Instead, they stood in a rough circle, spaced evenly, as though planted on purpose. Thick ropes, shimenawa, the kind you see marking sacred trees at shrines, hung around their trunks. And in the middle of the circle, slumped and rotting with age, stood a hut. Wooden, weathered grey. It looked to me like a small storage shed farmers sometimes use, but older and forgotten. I stopped dead. This wasn't on any map. I'd hiked this mountain since childhood, and I'd never seen or heard of this place. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint hum of insects. Something about the air smelled sour, like damp straw and rust. Then I heard it again. This time, the voice came from the hut. I didn't want to go any closer. Every nerve in my body told me not to, but my brain fought back. It could be someone, a lost hiker, a squatter, a hurt person. I swallowed hard and crept forward, each step crunching on the damp soil. The hut had a door, but it was barely hanging on its hinges. And on that door were scraps of paper, dozens of them, torn, faded, filthy. Ofura, wards, talisman, which were meant to be preventative measures, to keep something in, or something out. The surface had once been white maybe, but now they were brown, blending with the wood. That's why I hadn't noticed them until I was close. A rusted padlock dangled from the handle, broken, useless. The door gaped slightly, just enough to leave a shadowed gap. The voice came from inside. My stomach twisted. Everything about it screamed danger, and yet I reached out and I pushed, feeling like I needed to investigate, as I would be leading people into these mountainous woods soon. I needed to know what was going on in this hut. The door scraped open, and dust spilled in, and inside, a figure stood. A woman. She was facing away from me, standing dead center in the hut. Her clothes looked like a tattered white kimono, so shredded it resembled strips of cloth, barely clinging to her body. Her hair, long black, streaked with grey, hung wild and matted all around, all the way to her waist. She was thin, too thin, emaciated. Her limbs, glimpsed through the torn fabric, were like sticks. At her feet lay something dark and collapsed. An animal? A raccoon? Maybe a dog? Its body was twisted, its stomach ripped open. Blood, fresh and sticky, stained the floorboards. And the woman whispered low, rhythmical, "Te ka yo te ka." Her voice was a monotone, more like chanting than speaking. My body went cold. This isn't right. This isn't human. I stepped back, trying not to make a sound, and then her body swayed. Her head began to tremble, side to side, slowly at first, then faster. Her hair whipped across her shoulders as the shaking grew violent. "Te, sha, ika, yo." The words ripped out in a strange, stretched, broken rhythm. That was it. I couldn't hold back anymore. I turned and I ran. I forced my way back through the undergrowth, branches clawing at my arms and legs, insects bursting into the air. I didn't even think. My mind was completely blank. The only thought I had was to get away. When I burst back on the trail, I stopped, gasping, wiping the sweat from my face, and I looked back. 20 meters away, through the bush, a head rose above the greenery, a woman's head. That tangled hair, black streaked with grey. She stood motionlessly, watching. I spun and I ran. I raced down the mountain trail. The trees blurred past me. My breath tore in my throat. After a while, I dared to glance back, and she was still there, not running, not moving, just closer, standing in the shadow of an old cedar tree, her white rags stark against the bark. I ran harder, looked back again, closer still. No sign of pursuit, yet every time I looked, she had advanced, closing the distance silently, like a twisted game of Daruma-san ga koronda, or red light, green light. Each time I checked, she was nearer, without ever moving. I whimpered out loud, my legs burned. The village at the mountain's base finally came into view. Houses, safety. But when I looked one last time, she was there, about 3 meters behind me. I caught a glimpse of her face, hair plastered across her eyes, her mouth twitching, working silently like she was chewing on words I couldn't hear. I didn't look again, I couldn't force myself to. I staggered into the village, lungs ravenous, and I slammed my hand against the bell of the first house I saw. "Help! Somebody help!" When the door opened, an old woman stepped out, blinking. "What's the matter, boy?" I stammered. "Behind me, do you see anyone? I think someone's following me." She looked past me, calm as you like. "There's nobody there." I turned, trembling, to check for myself, and I saw that the road was empty. That was my experience. I never told anyone in the nature club, and I refused to take part in the event that we'd planned for the mountain. I still don't know what she was, and I sometimes doubt my recollection too. Did I imagine it all? Doesn't seem right though. At first, I couldn't even think about investigating, but lately, now the terror of that evening and my memory has dulled. Part of me wonders if I should. Maybe next year I'll go back. But even writing that makes me feel sick. That last part, that strange broken chant that woman was muttering, sticks with me more than anything. She kept repeating, "Te, sha, ika, yo." It doesn't really line up with anything I know in Japanese. But when you hear it strung out like that, it almost feels like fragments maybe half-remembered words, maybe an incantation. I guess it could be a corrupted prayer, something like "Pasquete yo," which means help me. If that's the case, maybe what I saw wasn't a monster at all, but the twisted ghost of someone who died in that hut, repeating her last plea over and over. Or maybe it's a mountain ritual. The hut itself, remember, was surrounded by old sacred ropes. Maybe that place was sealed off, protected. If those wards had been put there generations ago, what was trapped inside? A spirit? A mountain god? Something worse? Something demonic? And that chant may not have been hers. It could have been something she was made to repeat, like a mantra, to bind her, or a curse eating its way through her even after death. The most unsettling idea of all, though, is maybe it wasn't language, not words at all, just sounds, a voice trying to mimic human speech. And if that's true, then what exactly was standing in the hut? I grew up in a mountain village in Nagano Prefecture. We'd run down to the dam in the evenings, play on the broken, uneven asphalt until the sky turned red. Sometimes I'd sit near the old graveyard by the water, staring out at the distant glow of city lights. That summer, when I was in the 6th grade, I saw her for the first time. A flicker of white in the trees, something fluttering, moving deep inside the forest. I lived in a run-down wooden house with my grandfather, so honestly I thought I was tougher than most kids. I wasn't afraid of graves or the dark or anything like that. But when I saw her, I made an audible gasp. I couldn't say a word. And then she spoke first. The words tumbled out fast, too fast, like a chant or some foreign language I couldn't understand. She talked and talked, like she was either desperate or excited, and then she suddenly went quiet. And in a slow, deliberate voice, she said one phrase. I couldn't quite catch it, but if I had to write it down, it sounded like something, keteja. The first part was impossible to hear. When I came back to myself, I was lying in my futon at home. My grandfather was sitting beside me, muttering angrily that I shouldn't spend so much time out in the heat. That was all. I never told him about who I would call the white woman. But after that day, my life stopped being normal. By junior high, the sightings began. Every couple of months, a flicker of white would cross my vision. At the corner of an alley, reflected in a window, in the shadow of a department store, even far off in a forest. Moving where no one should be. Always that same flutter of white. I convinced myself that I was insane. I had this old second-hand laptop, and I searched obsessively. Seeing things that aren't there, hallucinations, anything that might explain what I was going through. I told myself that the white woman was just a delusion. And I was terrified that if anyone found out, they'd drag me to a hospital, strap me down, and drown me in medication, and I wouldn't be myself anymore. So I stayed quiet, even though every time her silhouette drifted across my sight, my heart nearly stopped. And then the dreams began. Every February, I would find myself in a dark room surrounded by a ring of candles, 19 of them, and in the center, her. Each year, more flames lit. By the time I graduated high school, 15 candles had burned, one for each year of my life. In the dream, she always spoke, long, rapid strings of words, too far away to hear clearly. Her long hair covered most of her face. I could only see a glimpse of her nose, the curve of her mouth, and she always sounded delighted, almost giddy. But the words never made any sense. They sounded like incantations, and in the dream, I couldn't move. On the surface, my life was fine. I was good at school, decent at football. I even had friends. but inside I was kind of waiting for the moment everyone would see how broken I was. And by high school I slipped into the role of the sickly kid. My friends treated me gently. They never knew how close to the truth that was. By the second year, I couldn't take it anymore. I started to believe I wasn't just crazy, that I was possessed. I began visiting shrines, temples, anywhere that might help. Every bit of money I earned from part-time jobs went into purification rituals. And nothing changed. The white figure just grew clearer, and my body grew weaker. And then one summer morning, in my 3rd year, I collapsed. Heat stroke. I cracked my skull on concrete. The doctor said it was an acute subdural hematoma, and I barely survived. And in that hospital bed, I was sure that the woman in white was going to kill me. My grandfather rushed to my side, crying with relief that I made it. And I was alive. And then I finally told him everything. I thought he'd laugh or get angry or summon the doctors on me, but instead, his face just went pale, and he told me the truth. Something had attached itself to me. A spirit. Not just any spirit. An evil one. Its name, he said, was Chioni Kiishi. He explained that he'd only heard fragments from his own parents, and even the name might be distorted by dialect. But the story was this: a female spirit, one that killed men and carried them away. And because it wasn't native to this land, shrines and temples here couldn't perceive it. They could never drive it away. When I asked why it had chosen me, my grandfather muttered, "Your blood is strong, that's why it noticed you." He never explained what blood he meant. That night he made his decision. He pressed money into my hand and he said, "I'm going to take care of this. I'm not going to be coming back though. Don't report me missing. In 7 years, collect what I leave behind. It's your father's inheritance. Until then, live strong." I begged him not to go. I cried and cried until I couldn't breathe, but he calmed me, and in the end, I promised to try and live on my own. Before he left, he gave me one last instruction. "If I fail, you'll know by tonight. You'll see it in your dream. If that happens, go back to the mountain where you first saw her. You must find her corpse, and when you do, soak a net in oil and throw it over her face." And then he walked out. And that was the last time I ever saw my grandfather. That night, I dreamed again. I was in the same dark room, the same circle of candles, the same woman in white. But this time, my grandfather was there. He sat between us, shouting at her, in that same uncanny language, and she screamed back, her voice rising, her hair thrashing as she lurched forward. But he never moved. He stood his ground, blocking her from me. And for the first time, I saw her face clearly. Across her forehead, an unknown script was scrawled, packed so tightly it covered her skin. But her eyes, well, they weren't really eyes at all. They were just hollow pits, darkness staring straight at me. I couldn't look away though. The shouting continued until finally, slowly, she stepped back. She sank into the circle of candles and turned her back on me. And then my grandfather turned to me and smiled. "It's all right. I bought you some time. She won't touch you until you're 24. But by then, you must find her corpse. Originally, you only had 1 year left, but now, you've got a chance. Live well." He patted my shoulder, and the dream ended. And when I woke up, I swear I could feel the slight warmth of a hand on my shoulder. But I was alone, in the hospital. After that night, my grandfather never came back. The villagers searched the mountain for days, combing the forest, calling his name, but they found nothing. No footprints, no belongings, not even a trace. It was as if he'd simply vanished into the trees. And yet I knew. That night in the dream, he stayed behind to fight her. He bought me time. But the job isn't finished. He told me If I wanted to survive past 24, I'd have to do what he couldn't. Go back to the mountains where I first saw her, find her body, and throw an oil-soaked net across her face. They never found my grandfather, and I've never found her corpse. Now I live in Tokyo, half in despair, half pretending to be normal. The dreams haven't returned, but the name, Chiyo Niki Ishi, and those hollow eyes, they've never left me. If anyone knows where she came from or what she is, please tell me. Because I don't know how much time I got left. This happened in the middle of March last year. High school graduation was over, and there were a few weeks until the start of university. I was killing time at home with my friend, Hiroshi. Both of us lying around, reading manga, just wasting the evening really. When another friend, Naoki, called. "Hey, you guys want to go on a drive?" Naoki explained that his older brother was going away on a long business trip, and during that time he could borrow his brother's car. So he suggested a late night drive, somewhere far away. Since Hiroshi and I had nothing better to do, we agreed right away. We'd already spent the past year driving pretty much anywhere we could. Whenever we had the chance, we'd go off exploring, so the local area was familiar to us. We decided to jump on the expressway, drive for a while, then randomly exit somewhere we didn't know. From there, we'd explore the back roads. After about an hour and a half on the highway, we reached a lonely interchange, deep in the mountains. There were no cars, no buildings, just a green sign glowing in the dark. We figured it was as good a place as any to exit. At first, the road surprised us. It was well paved, with plenty of streetlights, but there were no houses, no shops, but the type of mountain road where you still felt safe. So we drove on for a while, joking, chatting, until Naoki, who was driving, suddenly pointed out a narrow side road. "Should we try that one?" The road, he meant, was different. There was no lights at all, barely wide enough for the car. With tree branches jutting overhead, scraping the sides, it looked unsettling, but we were already getting bored of the wide, predictable highway roads, so we agreed. It felt different, that road. The headlights sliced through the pitch-black forest. Branches brushed against the roof. "This is creepy," I muttered, and the others laughed, though it was a nervous laughter. Then Hiroshi, sitting in the back, leaned forward suddenly. "Wait, stop, did you see that?" Neither Naoki nor I had noticed anything, but Hiroshi was staring into the trees. We pulled over to the side of the road. "What did you see?" I asked. "A woman," he said, his voice flat. "For a second, I saw a woman standing in the trees." I thought he was messing with us, so I replied, "Yeah, right, yeah, sure you did." But Hiroshi wasn't smiling. His voice had that edge to it. It kind of made my stomach clench a little. "I'm not kidding. Go back, man, let's check it out." So Naoki put the car in reverse, rolling slowly back to where Hiroshi claimed to have seen the woman. At first I saw nothing unusual, just thick undergrowth and the tall shadows of trees. Then, hidden by the shadows, we noticed a dirt path, branching downward into the forest. No pavement, just earth. "Here?" Naoki said. Hiroshi nodded, pointing towards a big rock a little way down. "She was right near that stone, right there." We drove slowly, down the dirt track, the beams of light bouncing over the unseen ground. The rock came closer into view, and the road widened just enough for us to stop. We got out. The forest surrounded us. It smelled of wet earth, pine, and old leaves decaying. The insects were loud here too, crickets and night beetles buzzing, moths flapping against the car's still warming hood and headlights. We looked around, There was nothing. No people, no movement. "See, no one here," I said, tired of the game and wanting to leave. But Hiroshi's expression never changed. "I saw her," he insisted, his voice sharp now, defensive. Naoki sighed and walked closer to the rock, shining his phone flashlight. "Hey, look, what's that?" Behind the rock, half hidden in grass, was a single boot, a woman's boot. The three of us just stared at it in silence. "Oh God, maybe she came here to end things on her own terms," I whispered. Naoki frowned. "But there's no car. How would someone get all the way out here on foot?" We stood there arguing softly, our voices hushed. I guess we were all concerned that there might be someone nearby. And that's when I noticed Hiroshi had gone quiet again. He wasn't looking at us, he was staring rigid into the trees. "Hiroshi?" Naoki asked. Slowly, Hiroshi raised a trembling hand and pointed. At first I couldn't see it. The brush was too thick, but then 7, maybe 8 meters away, I saw a figure between the trees. A woman. She was young, maybe late teens, early 20s. Her clothes looked normal. Nothing strange except her face, or rather, the fact that we couldn't see it. Her hair was long and dark, hanging forward, covering everything. Naoki exhaled in relief. "See? She's real. She must have been left behind or something. Maybe she had an argument and got off in the mountains. Let's call out. Maybe she needs a ride back to town." He started towards the trees. "Don't!" Hiroshi's shout cracked through the silence, desperate and raw. Naoki ignored him. "Hey, are you okay?" he called into the trees. And that's when I noticed it wasn't her hair covering her face, it was the angle of her head. Her neck was completely turned backwards. I felt my stomach flip. The woman shifted slowly. She turned towards us. No, not turned. She moved so that her back was now facing us, but her head was still twisted the wrong way. And then she smiled. Not with her eyes, we couldn't see them. Just a mouth. A pale, wide smile cutting through the shadows. The forest seemed to tighten around us. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Hiroshi grabbed both of our arms and yanked. "Run!" We scrambled back to the car, stumbling over roots and branches. I couldn't help but glance back. She was coming, pushing through the brush, walking backwards, her smile never faltering, each step too deliberate, too steady, as though the forest itself was making way for her. We threw ourselves into the car. Naoki fumbled with the ignition, cursing. I shouted that she was following, but when I looked, the spot where she'd been was now empty. For one instant, I let myself breathe. Then Naoki screamed. On the driver's side window, a hand appeared, a woman's hand, perfectly white, nails painted, the fingers flexing lazily against the glass. Naoki slammed the car into reverse. We shot backwards, the tires spitting gravel. He spun the wheel and roared back up to the main road. When we reached the lit paved road again, she was gone. We didn't want to speak. None of us wanted to. Eventually we merged back onto that expressway. The air in the car was suffocating, thick with sweat, gasoline, and the lingering smell of the forest. I begged them to stop at a service station anywhere bright. At around 3 a.m. we finally pulled into a drive-in. Only a handful of trucks sat in the lot, their drivers asleep inside. The fluorescent lights hummed, the vending machines clattered. For the first time all night, I felt like we might be safe. We brought hot drinks, sat on a bench inside, sipping quietly, each of us lost in thought. The silence was heavy but stable, safe. Then, from the vending machine corridor behind us, we heard it. A laugh, a soft feminine chuckle. We lost it. We bolted for the car, half screaming, and didn't stop driving until we were back in our own town. After that night we graduated, split up, went our separate ways. I moved out, started living alone, and nothing's physically happened since then. But sometimes at the edge of my vision, I see her. Just for a moment. Hiroshi and Naoki and I keep in touch, but none of us ever bring up that night, not even once. And I don't ask if they see her too, because every time I catch that smile flicker in my peripheral vision, I tell myself the same thing. It's just my imagination.